In at number 10, we have the Chalicotherium, and in my opinion, this creature really does have to just make this list, because, like, when you look at it and its taming method and kind of how useful this creature is, but also how much more useful this creature could be if it did get a TLC, it really makes me feel like this creature is in dire need of one. Maybe a slight change in the tame method would be sufficient. Maybe don't make it just a normal knockout tame, but maybe have some kind of different feeding material for a passive tame to make it more accessible to actually tame, because getting that beer is certainly something, but, you know, maybe that it gives the creature some sort of character to just its general identity, so maybe that one go ahead and that's fine. But if it has just some general quality of life improvements, and actually for me it is mainly the tame method when coming back to it. If it had a more accessible tame method, if its rocks maybe did some more damage and were slightly more aimable, that's probably just my part, that could be useful. And maybe if it had some maybe like an extra special ability or something like that, it could really bring this creature together. And I'm actually keen to hear what you think your ideas should be for these creatures and what TLCs they should actually get. Next up, we have got the Basilisk, and I feel like this is such a cool creature when you think of it, but when you actually maybe use it in practice, it doesn't really hype up to everything. And partly I think it should have some better mobility overall, maybe some extra abilities on top of what it already has, maybe allow it to deal more damage. I think the tame method is fine, it makes sense. It's a little bit irritating, but considering what kind of creature this is, you would probably expect that. I'm fine with it. If they did want to change it in future with a TLC, that'd be fine, but that's not usually what TLCs are about. It'd be adding some extra special abilities and like more maybe utilizing that underground ability even further, and maybe like an ability to send shockwaves and knock back creatures under the ground and like leap up under them and just demolish them. You could definitely use some really cool features with that as well, which aren't currently in the game. Now, next up, we've got the Giga, and I feel like it's a time at this point where this creature needs some sort of TLC, and maybe it's not in the most dire need, but I really feel like compared to the Crocodonsaurus and other creatures like that, it's very far behind in just what this creature is and what its abilities are like. And yeah, I know it's a lot easier to tame than a Crocodonsaurus in most cases. It's in some ways a lot more resource intensive because you need all of those trank arrows, but it's not as laborious of a method and less things can kind of go wrong in the taming of this thing. But I still think it's quite dated in how it works as a creature compared to something like a Crocodonsaurus. I'm not saying like make it exactly like that creature, but maybe if it had the stats of like a wild Giga, maybe you'd still keep that rage buff if necessary. Otherwise, remove that, as you know it's quite a big hindrance, and the Crocodonsaurus doesn't have that. And I know I'm relating it a lot to that creature, but art is a different game now than what it was in 2016, so this creature, it has a lot of dated things about it, which is why I'm putting it on this list. I'm not saying like maybe it's in the most dire need of TLC, but I really do think Wildcard should give the Giga at some point a reconsider over, because it's such an influential arc tame, and I think it deserves something. In at number 7, we have got the Carb Enemies, and I put this thing here as I think it could be a really useful starter tame. It kind of already is, but it could be even better if it had just a little TLC, and maybe increase its movement a little bit, give it some special abilities, possibly some kind of spinning attack that could stun some enemies underwater, maybe give it some better gathering features, possibly something like that. You could even maybe give it the pack buff in a pack. I know it's not really the most useful thing. Again, very keen to hear your ideas on what TLCs you think these creatures should get, and what actually other creatures which I haven't put on this list, which you think you need TLC should actually have. Personally for me, if it had some kind of special attack on top of it, its saddle is fine. Not like it, yeah, the cementing pace is a little bit of a hindrance. You could make that a little bit cheaper, but it kind of makes sense. It is a good underwater creature. I'd say maybe boost its speed a little bit, add maybe more of an essence of damage, maybe make these things better turret soakers. There are just so many good opportunities with this creature, which I think Wildcard kind of misses out on. And I feel like it could be a really high step of a level over where the Parasol was. And the Stego is such a different creature now to what it was before it had that TLC. And if the Cob enemies could go under similar treatment, maybe if not as OP as the Stego, it could be a really useful thing for the Cob enemies to have. And I personally think it's quite underrated and people don't give it enough credit, and if it had that TLC then maybe it would bring this creature to some new heights. Next up we've got the Angler, the king of harvesting any kind of silica pearls, but personally I think it can be used and remembered for a lot more than that. It can be just a really great, agile, maybe higher damage dealing creature with some other wealth of abilities, and maybe it could do something with obviously the main thing that defines an anglerfish, which is the light on the front of it, and it could possibly do something. But I'm not actually sure how much it illuminates, but if it would be kind of useful if you could really use it to illuminate your way in the night, that would be quite nice. If it had some kind of basic saddle and armor, that would boost it up another level, and some more special abilities, because all it can really do is attack and just gather some silica pearls. And I feel like you can be really inventive with this creature and its design. Although yes, maybe it's not the most dinosaur-like creature, I still think there's a lot that can be done to this creature to improve it in everything that it stands for, instead of just being a good silica pearl gatherer and just your generic basic ocean tame. In at number 5 we got the Packy, and this creature really just has to be here for me on this list. And it's kind of sad looking at this because it's so useless, but with just a few simple changes it could be a much better creature. Firstly, if it could gather berries, that would put this thing at significantly better heights for general use. Also, I think the mobility of this creature is fine. Its special attack could be utilized in a better fashion if you had more mobility when it was actually charging, because it's not particularly OP. If it dealt a little bit more torpor, that could be nice. If its taming method wasn't so long and laborious, that would make this creature a more defined, useful one. And if it had some maybe special harvesting abilities or some kind of buff it gave other creatures, or something small like that, like a buff and obviously the ability to gather berries and just a tame method that isn't as difficult, then it could really boost this creature in terms of its abilities and where it actually is in the game, because you can just get a Parasol and that creature is going to do so much more good. And it took absolutely ages to kill this raptor. Personally, I do think these things should deal a little bit more damage just to the general creatures, possibly because they are quite heavily armored creatures. It would make sense. Next up we've got the Archaeopteryx, but I'm also going to put the Galley in a similar spot as well, as I think the Galley is just lacking in the health department and a bit of damage as well, although it doesn't really need that, and some weight definitely that could drastically improve that creature. And again, maybe a special ability of sorts, maybe like an extra dash. But talking about the Archaeopteryx, since the glide suit came out, and the cinema crops after that as well, this creature is pretty much just useless, and it's just an old version of those two things. If you could use this thing like a cinema crops though, and as sort of an alternative to that creature on other maps, as the cinema crops isn't on every map, then it could really boost this creature. It could just be a better use of a creature. You can still use it like a hang glider, but then you wouldn't have to carry it. It could just go on your back normally. And yeah, there's a few things that you can do with this creature which can turn it from something completely useless to something like the cinema crops. In at number 3 we've got the Megalosaurus, and the female version of course, not the male one. That's a good thatch gatherer. Personally, I think, yeah, maybe this is only really used for breeding just Megalosauruses, but you could at least do something with this creature. It can't even attack. It has no attack whatsoever. This is in dire need of some sort of TLC to actually be a useful creature. Apart from that one use, which isn't even really utilizing this creature, it's just essentially using it as a placeholder to make baby Megalosauruses, and then if you get female babies out of that, it's not good. You only want the male babies out of it to get good thatch gatherers and whatever you use general male Megalosauruses for. The female one, it's just, yeah, maybe it doesn't have all the horns and all of that, but I still think it should have some sort of edge, which would be like, why you tame this creature apart from just, oh, I want to breed some Megalosauruses, so I'm going to get both of these. And I know generally most art creatures don't have distinction between both genders of creatures, and considering this one does, I feel like Wildcard could do something with this creature to really highlight those differences, and you'd have different uses for both instead of this one just being like utterly useless and obsolete. Next up, we've got the Microraptor, and the reason why I'm putting it so high on the list isn't necessarily because I think it needs the most amount of TLC, but I think its ability is quite a cool and interesting one, and if utilized properly, it could really make this a good sidekick. Again, you just have this just like maybe on your back or on your shoulder. I think you can actually put this thing on your shoulder, but if you have it on your back like a Cinemacrops or another creature, I'm just trying to think there. I think the Seeker, whatever it's called, has that same sort of ability. Actually, don't. I think that's in a mod, but still, if it had that, and then you could just send it on riders, and then it would come back onto you, so you could knock people off their riders, and then it would come back to your back. That could just be a really cool, simple ability for this creature to have. And in at number 1 is the Aranio, and there are so many things that you can do cool with spiders, and I'm kind of going to put the Onyx here as well, although maybe if you turn the Onyx into something more like the Desmodus, but maybe a slightly dumbed down version that was easier to tame, that could be very useful because that creature is pretty much obsolete. With this creature though, the Aranio, if it had the ability to climb up walls, something simple like that, and it actually dealt some reasonable amount of damage and had some decent health and all things like that, then it wouldn't just be a sort of placeholder obsolete creature, which you would only tame if you wanted to tame every creature on Ark, and it's actually just a generally huge pain to tame this creature, so I'd recommend a slight change in that taming method. And if you could do that and make this sort of like the Bloodstalker but have some distinction, it could be a really great creature. In at number 10, we have got the Maywing, and there's kind of one main reason at why I'm putting this creature on this list, and it is that it's such an insanely fast travel mount. It is just inherently very OP in nature. Like, you look at this creature, you think of this creature, you think of really speedy travel mounts, and that is just an OP feature in itself, being able to travel around the map with that speed without having to go into creative mode and all of that stuff. And that's not even an option if you're playing on a server. That's only really an option on just a general single player server, and you probably wouldn't do it anyway because it kind of ruins the fun of the game. But still, just I was needing something to compare it to, and although obviously it's not going to go as fast as someone flying around in creative mode, it is going to fly faster than someone in a tech suit, and it's a lot easier to get than a tech suit because you only need to be level 19 to get the saddle for this thing, and then boom, like one of the easiest tames in the game, just trap it before you actually start knocking it out. That kind of goes for most flyers though, or even pretty much every Ark creature that's a knockout tame. It's just so much easier if you do. So yeah, that's the kind of method to the madness, and then you've got yourself a really great, really quick, speedy travel mount that's also a possible feeding trough, and it can gather berries as well, so just a nice little feature for this thing to have. Next up, we got the Thyla, and this thing kind of works for both PvE and PvP players alike out there. This creature really does pack a huge punch in damage department. It also deals the bleed ability, and it can scale any kind of wall or vertical surface, making it a prime creature for raiding people's bases on a PvP server or just in any given PvP scenario. They're also pretty decent on SOTF as well due to their high mobility, and they're not too difficult to tame on SOTF either, or really just not too difficult to tame in general. The only real difficulty is the biome they spawn in, as the redwoods can not be the friendliest of biomes pretty much all the time unless you're extremely lucky, so you always do have to be careful for these things, and like Microraptors and all of that. And there are loads of things that want to kill you in the redwoods, but you know, at least Thylas do spawn there, and you can get a lot of great use out of these creatures, so I really do recommend taming one, and I really do think they are extremely OP. The only thing that could make them even more OP is if they were actually allowed into bosses, because when these things came out, they were seen as too overpowered, so then they didn't get the ability to go into bosses. But now with some newer creatures, it's kind of a little bit outdated in the sense it's actually why the Giga is not on this list. It would have been. This was maybe like 2020, 2019, 2018, but that creature is significantly more outdated nowadays than the Thyla, so, you know, that's why that creature is not on the list, if you were ever wondering at any point. But you can see actually this bleed ability in just a second here. I used to not really know what it did. I just thought it was cool, but it deals damage on a percent base scale instead of just a general damage dealing scale. So no matter the health of the creature, it will always deal the same percent amount of damage, which is why the bleed ability is so OP. And really, if you do have the time, tame yourself a Thyla. You are definitely not going to regret getting one of these things. They are totally worth it, and considering they spawn on the island, they're extremely accessible to like every single Ark player out there without fail whatsoever. Next up, we have got the Theory, and the reason why it's on this list is not just because its saddle was unlocked at level 69.
Nice.
But purely that this creature is an insane gatherer of so many kinds of resources, including fiber, which is actually one which is considerably harder to get than most other resources in bulk with a creature like this, as most herbivores will just gather berries, whereas this thing can gather berries and fiber, and it's also a pretty OP boss creature as well. It really does deal a lot of damage and pack a punch. You could probably tell it would deal a lot of damage in that kind of general area, because look at how large these things' claws are, and when you look at it, it's, I kind of call it the Freddy Krueger of Ark, if you will, or the Tickle Chicken, just depending on what context you really want. Those claws really do, again, pack a huge amount of damage into this creature. Really useful for the dragon boss fight on the island if you've never done that before, and the fiber gathering really does put them up another level for me, as yes, the moss chops is another great fiber gatherer. It really doesn't do all too much apart from that. I'm pretty sure it's really great at gathering organic polymer as well, but this is a much more OP creature and significantly more useful just to the general Ark player out there, and especially with that saddle level being so perfect, you really can't miss an opportunity on taming one of these things. They're also really great at gathering thatch and wood too, so there's nothing not to love about this creature, so I really do recommend you taming one of these things as soon as you can, really. Next up, in number 7, we have got the RG, and doesn't this creature really deserve to be on the spot for being just such a great PvE creature? And also, I'm pretty sure it's a really great PvP creature as well, although I don't really can think of too many uses off the top of my head for this creature in terms of PvP use, but you know, there are definitely still going to pretty much be all the same uses as for PvE players, as this is a really great traveling mount and it has a heck of a lot of weight, so getting metal from point A to point B, or even maybe to point C if you're feeling like it, will be really easy. And you can also pick up a wealth of creatures with this creature, which definitely does aid this thing in being a really great successful creature, because maybe sometimes with a flyer you do want to actually pick up some creatures like the Desmodus do not have that ability, although that creature is on the list for several other reasons which I think do put it higher on the list than this creature. It also does have a portable smithy as a saddle, so if you ever break a metal tool if you're out farming, well, the RG can just simply help you with that, as long as you have some metal ingots that have been smelted. Of course, you can't just use the normal raw metal, if you didn't know that already. I'm sure pretty much all of you did. There's not really a point to me saying that, but you know, just might as well, because I'm sure someone's done it before. Then you can easily repair all your metal gear, and they also do regen as well. If you quickly kill something and then eat that dead body, then you get a really nice quick regen buff, which is actually, it's pretty useful, and it's a lot more useful, and you'll use it a lot more than maybe you'd expect. Next up, we got the Carcharodontosaurus, and doesn't this creature just objectively have to be really OP? It's a hugely massive carnivore capable of dealing a lot of damage, and I also was going to consider putting the Titanosaur and things like the mech on the list as well. Actually, I might put the mech kind of here at this spot, because I kind of think it deserves to be here as well. Really huge damage dealing thing, but the Titanosaur is hugely outdated nowadays, and obviously you could kind of just chuck all the Titans here as well, although I really tend to avoid those more as they're not permanent creatures, although they still definitely do count as creatures. You can make them permanent, of course, with things like mods and all of that for the Titans, but you know, I tend to stray away from those things, and the Carcharodontosaurus is one of those more powerful creatures you can get. That's not the only reason why a creature can be absolutely OP, but if you go by sheer strength, then this probably is the most powerful creature on the list. You could say maybe some other creatures could be contested against it and to it, and you know, probably just have to get Cantex to do a video on that, and then there you go, you would get the answers. But I'm probably going to say this is the most powerful one. It's somewhat more difficult to tame than the Giga because there are a few more steps. I have a guide on my channel, I'll put it up here if I actually remember to do it, otherwise you can just search that. It's not actually too difficult, you just have to be aware for some things, because it can go quite horribly wrong if you don't do it right and you're just going to be wasting a lot of time, which, you know, you probably don't want to do. But once you do have one of these things, you really are going to enjoy it. In at number 5, we have got the Shadowmane, and this creature is here because it is just so jam-packed full of abilities. You really can't deny this creature's absolutely hugely immense strength when it comes to pretty much anything in the Arc space. It is basically uncontested in size and mobility and all of that. There is kind of one other creature which is in the number 3 spot actually, which personally I think it's really OP, but that's for a slightly different reason. But when it comes to maybe pure mobility, this does have a lot more. Like, just look at how high this thing can jump. It also does have the hydration buff, which does play a huge part in having a really OP creature. If you have buffs, the Megatherium is another great shout as well, although not on this list. It definitely wouldn't be more OP than some of these other creatures. I think that creature is actually, yes, still while OP, maybe not one of the most OP, although you could easily put it on this list and have people agreeing with you. You actually may want this thing to be on the list, so I guess I give it a quick mention here. The Shadowmane is just so packed full of abilities though. It's got the hydration buff, it's got pack buffs, it's got all of it. It can charge up damage over time, and it even has natural armor. It really is a great OP creature. Next up, we have got the Reaper, and this thing kind of just had to be here, didn't it? When you think of it, it is just such a big, bulky, huge creature, capable of so much damage. Is actually kind of a little bit absurd when you think of it, and it also really does fit into its map very well, but that's not what we're talking about today in this video. We're just talking about a creature that purely deals a lot of damage and also just has great mobility and is generally a really well-rounded creature which is capable of a lot of things. If this was able to go into bosses, then it would be even more OP. It can't though, which is kind of why the creature next up on the list, although maybe not as strong, has a lot of edge over this creature, although you can use it on Extinction for the Titans, although the Giga and the Calcodonsaurus are the more preferable options. But with loads of new creatures coming out in mods in ASA, I know Extinction is still not here yet, but there may be some other options which people may be kind of becoming more fond to. But either way, just in general terms, the Reaper is a really OP creature. Taming one on Arboration feels like an absolute slog, but a slog that I'm worth going through, and on Gen 2 it's ridiculously easy. So if you don't feel like spending an age going through a huge slog, then tame one on Gen 2 and they're really easy. But once you do have one, you really do feel on top of the world, especially if you do it on Arboration as a process. It's just significantly harder to get it done as on Gen 2. The actual process of taming is obviously the same. And in at number 3, we have got the Deinonychus, and this creature literally does bleeder damage to bosses, which is kind of the main reason why it's here, as that is an ability which no other Arc creature has, and it really does make this thing a hugely more OP creature. The fact that it can deal percentage based damage instead of just raw based damage to boss creatures, it's an insane thing to have, and you can grip onto them and all of that, and it's just an insane ability to have. Really, it feels like an absolute cheat if you go into bosses with the Deinonychus, because obviously you're also going to go with the pack as well. You're going to have pack buffs on top of it. There's just going to be buffs everywhere, and you're going to melt through those bosses so quickly. Obviously, don't do the Titans on Extinction with the Deinonychus, but for everything else, these things work really well, and maybe not the Moda actually, because they're not particularly very good underwater creatures, although they still can do a little bit. Just, you know, maybe that's not particularly what they were designed for, so probably don't bring them to the Moda fight. They'll probably drown anyway, so really, I wouldn't try that whatsoever. I don't really know why I'm trying to like convince you to not use these things for the Moda. I'm pretty sure you weren't going to anyway, but you know, I guess that segment happened. Also, these things take no full damage, which is a nice thing, so you don't have to dismount just before you hit the ground, no matter, like, no, when you fall from a higher place. Sorry, I don't know what sentence was trying to come out there, but that's never going to happen again. Either way, these things, great mobility, and although maybe their parkouring skills isn't quite as elegant as the Thyla solution, I still really like it, and it works, and once you get the hang of it, it really does act quite well. And at number 2, we've got the Desmodus, and this creature just kind of has to be here because it can go, no, we're not going to talk about that. It can go invisible in the night. It's not why it can go OP. My brain is in a muddle. The reason why is because Sanguine Elixir exists, it's a blood bag farm, and you can also pick players off riders with this thing, which is absolutely OP for given PvP scenarios. That's why it's not because it can go invisible in the night time. I can't even show you that because I recorded all this B-roll on the Wastelands biome, and then I realised that you can't set it to night. I probably should have gone to the Snow Dome or the Desert Dome, but I didn't. So, you know, but at least you know it exists. These things can also just grab onto walls, like the Tapijara, which is a nice thing. Just don't press E or the dismount button when you're like this. Someone's done it before. Press space or whatever the equivalent button is on console. Not really sure, but, you know, these things, really OP creatures. Sanguine Elixir, absolute cheap for tames, a third of it done like that with a click of a button. And obviously the fact that you can pick people off riders with this thing, insane. Really great for PvP scenarios, and it's also really quick as well. And in number 1 we have the Rhino Ganatha, and the reason why I say this is the most OP art creature is it really does feel out of place for just what it can do. The fact that this thing can pick up Rexes and Paraceratheriums and all of that just kind of seems a bit out of this world to me, and although they're really useful in ASA at the moment because cryopods don't exist, still they feel really out of place in the general art game to me, and kind of maybe too far out of a league that they really shouldn't be going into. And personally, from my opinion, I would like to nerf the Rhino Ganatha because I find it way too OP. Personally, also on ASA, I think it should be a little bit rarer. Not quite as rare as it is on just general normal ASE, as you can barely even find those things, but still, on ASA, I feel like there's a little bit of an overspawn there. And you may completely disagree with me on this, and you're happy to, and you can comment down below your thoughts, as I'm always happy to hear your thoughts on creatures like this. But personally, I come from a much earlier stage of Arc playing, from like 2015, 2016, 2017, etc, etc. Going onwards, I did start playing in 2015, so I've been playing Arc for absolutely ages now, and I kind of really like those primitive feelings of the game. Obviously the game has to evolve, and generally it will kind of just get easier, and there'll be some new, cooler, more OP creatures being added as the game progresses, but I feel like this is a huge step too far, and I don't really know what the Fasilasuchus, I think it is, will be like on Scorched. Maybe that will be even more OP than this thing, and I don't really like the way that this is all going, but it does seem to be quite popular with the general art player base, so I guess it's a working marketing solution for wildcard and snail games and those kind of people. But also with the like expansion pack, like extra creatures as well, that's like even more OP. I really don't like the route that it's going with these kind of creatures. Again, you're very happy to disagree with me, but personally I think the Rhino Ganatha is too OP. And currently I think it's kind of the most OP arc tame out there, just no questions asked. Personally, really not a favourite of mine, but you know, that's my opinion on it, and I still do think it is a great creature. I'm not dissing it for any of that, just personally, like, way too OP. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you enjoyed this one. As always, comment down below, what do you think of my Rhino Ganatha query? Do you agree with that or not? Comment down below what's the most OP art creature to you, and if you didn't agree with this list, your 10 down below, and I'll see you all later.